this is Alex. Welcome to Socialism Survival Podcast. This week it is podcast number 10. Yes, we did it. Congratulations, Alex. Thank you. Thank you, my listeners, for staying with me that long. But even those of you who are new to this podcast, if you like to hang in here, it won't take too long to catch up with me and other listeners. I hope you all had wonderful Thanksgiving. And now, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk on this week's subject, surviving socialistic education. As you may know from my previous podcasts, I was born and educated in USSR. In podcast number 3 and podcast number 5, I described how Soviet school was used as an instrument of Communist Party to enforce brainwashing and mandatory vaccinations. Well, as a 6-year-old, I didn't really know all of that. I loved to learn, and with many tears, I convinced our dad that I must go to school. Because Soviet school entry age was 7, he had to go with me to the regional office of people's education to get special evaluation of my abilities to learn, which I passed, and special permit was issued, allowing me in school. I was youngest of approximately 30 students in my class. In one way it was good, but in other not so good. As the youngest student, I could get some teachers' condescension, but it wasn't easy for me to fight older classmates. We lived less than a mile from the school, which also had two sides, good and bad. Good because I always could escape if there were problems, and bad because teachers could easily come and complain to my parents about their son's behavior. In Soviet Union, we didn't have, like here in America, elementary, middle, and high school. Rather, all classes, 1 through 10, first through 10th grade, were in one building. From first to third grade, we were in one designated room and had one teacher. From fourth grade and on, we had to roam between all 3 stories of school's brick building, from one classroom to another, depending on subject of study. School year would start always on September 1st with celebratory assembly on the soccer field, where all classes were lined in rank like soldiers. Communist patriotic songs were played and speeches followed, everything in accordance with government and party instructions. Soon after my first class started, we were lined up again, this time to be dedicated into little Octobrists, or as I described in podcast number 3, Octoberniks. First of 3 communist youth groups, fully integrated into Soviet educational system. A ruby-colored five-pointed star badge with the portrait of Lenin in his childhood was affixed to everyone's shirt. Together we had to repeat the oath of faithfulness to the works of Communist Party of Soviet Union. Although star was temporarily attached to my shirt too, I refused to recite the oath and later to wear star badge in school as it was required. When we reached fourth grade, the school personnel lined us up again, this time to put red ties around our necks and to dedicate us into second communist youth group called Pioneers. Again, everyone had to reaffirm his or her faithfulness to the ideals of Lenin's October Revolution. Soon after that, I had a private ceremony of red tie burial in our backyard toilet. That wasn't to impress anyone with a show, but rather to reaffirm to myself what my position toward socialism, communism, and their ideals is and always will be. At that age of 10, I was able to distinguish between good and evil, between atheistic tyranny and true freedom that comes from God. Through all my years in socialistic education, such things as atheism, Darwinism were part of the school curriculum. Whether we studied history or geography or biology or chemistry or any other subject, nowhere you could find God, but everything was based on evolution theory. I was mocked, physically, mentally, and emotionally mistreated for my faith in God. Soviet atheistic propaganda, well paid by socialist government, created a bunch of lies and horrible accusations against God's people that were spread through government-controlled institutions with public school first among many. For example, teachers and visiting atheist lecturers first defined to startle students every religious group that disagreed with socialistic ideology as dangerous sects. Then they told various horrible stories, especially targeting underground faith-based groups. While we were hiding from government persecution, they lied. Why we hid, telling students that at these religious meetings, actually, sex perverts were getting together for orgies, or that children were sacrificed to God in bloody rituals. How do you think my classmates were looking at me after such smear, after such dirty lies? Although I denied all such accusations, some boys thought if they beat me hard enough, maybe they then will get me to admit taking part in any of such rituals. Even, as I said, I loved being educated. That wasn't always truly available. In Soviet school, every teacher was also a class leader. My class leader was math teacher. Once she decided to force me to wear that red tie. When she saw me sitting in a class without tie, she would cast me out, saying that I only will be allowed back in a classroom wearing red pioneer tie. She was yelling at me in front of other students with saliva foaming around her mouth. She tried to force me to submit, but didn't succeed. To make story short, later I was allowed back to mathematics class. She was replaced with another class leader, and shortly after that she died from cancer. I wouldn't speculate if it was God's punishment. I think she punished herself because uncontrolled anger often leads to cancer. Sad thing is that she died as slave to socialistic godless propaganda without knowing God and being responsible for leading many others away from eternal destiny with God. In Soviet Union, believers from underground groups rarely were allowed to colleges and universities. That was done to give statistics to anti-religious agitators and propagandists for their smear campaign, so they could say publicly, look, these people are half educated. They are illiterate. That's why they believe in God. In order to give knowledgeable response to atheists' attacks, I was self-educating, achieving cognition outside official Soviet education. At the age of 13, I already have read such philosophers as Aristotle, Hegel, Kant, and others. Here is another example of how Soviet system blocked me from getting higher education. As young aspiring poet, I had my poetry highly evaluated by local literary organization, but they refused to publish my works, and they refused to recommend me to Gorky Institute of Literature in Moscow. I wanted to get there. And all that because of my faith in God. Only later, during Gorbachev's perestroika, some of my poems were suddenly discovered in archives and published in local newspapers. Back to the school. Another duty of class leader was to conduct special meetings where we had to learn communist, patriotic songs and to be prepared for celebration of Soviet socialistic holidays in school. When I saw recently how American children are taught in American school to sing praises to current American leader who is socialist, it reminded me old Soviet times. I thought, where am I? Is it still free America? Of course, while living in America, I have learned that education system here went wrong long time ago. In early 1960s, prayer was outlawed in American public school. Following this, America's moral decline rapidly accelerated. Step by step, godly education principles were replaced by deadly socialistic values. In some aspects, it is even worse than it was in Soviet school. There, we at least had strict discipline, and teachers were allowed to apply some serious disciplinary measures to those who were distracting learning process. Soviet socialism, while rejecting God, still used almost like carbon copy of biblical moral foundation to teach their morals, just without mentioning God, of course. In America, it looks like socialists who currently control education are totally rejecting biblical morality as an archaic survival of the past. American socialist educators, using old Soviet psychopolitics tactics with support of mental drugs, brought up this new generation of youngsters who are ready to embrace the change to global socialism. About a year ago, I was impressed by Gold Through the Fire movie. Remember, Gold Through the Fire. I recommend you to find and watch it too. It is the story of 17-year-old Russian Christian boy Peter Smyslov, who performs a daring escape to get away from the religious persecution of the Soviet Union, leaving behind his parents who are put in prison for printing Bibles. He comes to America and stays with a Christian family. While attending the local high school, and much to his surprise, instead of anticipated freedom, he suffers a different kind of persecution because of his belief in God and the Bible. Thanks to God, I survived Soviet socialistic education, because in spite of Soviet ideological force, my parents took seriously their God-given responsibility to educate their children according to God's word. And this kind of education has proven to withstand any vicious attacks on young souls. As it is written in my Bible verse of the week, Proverbs 22:6, it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it." Sadly, many Christian and Jewish parents entrusted their children to American public education while chasing green American rubles. You understand what I mean, dollars. Here is my opinion. Public education should be an exception, for example, for orphans or kids whose parents either have lost their job or have such problems as alcohol and drugs and therefore cannot be taking responsibility for their children. Most schools must be private, and instead of getting ripped off by property taxes to pay for the schools, that money must be put in special accounts designated for their kids' education. Well, that is just my opinion. Will it ever happen in America? You decide. As for now, unfortunately, even many Soviet immigrants are following American public school lead, and they are reaping the harvest in many of their children departing from God and becoming criminals. Dear Americans, until you take seriously your responsibility to educate your children, you cannot be entrusted with responsibility of bringing this country to a better and happier future. Make your choice now, before it's too late. Before I finish this podcast, let me bring you a bit of entertainment in form of Russian anecdote. Dad wakes up his son, first grader, in the morning of September 2nd. Hey son, wake up. It's time for the school. Why? I was there yesterday already. Thank you for listening to this podcast. To find more podcasts, go to socialismsurvival.com. Get educated. God bless you. God bless America.